Well, hi, and welcome to the Christian Contrast, where we talk about how walking with Jesus leads us to live differently than those in the world around us. We're here today with not exactly a second part, but another conversation about AI. And so I'm joined by Robert Crosby, friend and a member of our church. So, people beyond just LBF Church sometimes watch these, but a lot of people at the church would know you and your family. But for those who don't, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So my name is Robert and my wife is Lori. We've been here at LBF for, right around 5 years, I think. We've been over here. We've got a couple of kids. So I work at California Baptist University. I'm a professor of psychology there. And my wife, Lori, is a marriage and family therapist and interested in the topic of AI. So not an expert by any means, but is something that interfaces a lot with my professional world. And I find it intriguing, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we get together and we have conversations about all kinds of, wide-ranging things, family, faith, all those sorts of things. But a few weeks ago, we had just an extended conversation about AI, and I found it so interesting. And part of it is because you're sort of in that academic space. And so there were elements of the conversation that I really wanted to ask you about. And so I thought, if I had been recording that whole conversation at Chipotle, I might have just posted it. Mm-hmm. But I thought, let's get together and let's dig in a little bit more to some of these topics. So I wanted to start just with, being in the more academic educational space with college students. How are you seeing AI impact how you as a professor and how your colleagues are approaching the whole idea of education?
Well, this is a game changer. It is, I compare it to the advent of the internet. And the way people react to it, there's a range. I think you mentioned this in the other podcast, that some people have trepidation. I'm afraid of this. I'm pushing against this. I don't want to talk about it. No. And you've got people that are excited, and folks who are knowledgeable, others who don't really understand. But I compare it to the internet, and back then it was, well, how do we make sure students don't use the internet for their schoolwork? And it's a tool for cheating and so forth. And so there's a little bit of that. How do we make sure that they don't use AI to cheat, which is a huge concern. But the conversation is broader for faculty. So last year at our fall faculty development, I think there was one workshop. They do workshops you can go to. I think there was one about AI, and this time there were two. It was talked about from the main stage at our smaller college division levels. It was discussed. So it is a huge conversation right now, and it's not just how to prevent cheating, but how do we look at this in a positive way and equip students with tools they need. How do we make assignments more meaningful? I mean, just changing the way we do. We're going back to Scantron, some of us, which I haven't used in 15 something years. So how to, handwriting things, these kind of things are being used again. So some of those things, how to help students learn to think independently while integrating those kind of resources. And I think one of the coolest things I heard someone say, I'm trying to remember who it was, CBU is a Great Commission university, or they refer to themselves that way, and meaning that's the ultimate goal. And so he says, well, how can AI be a tool of the Great Commission? How can we reach, disciple the nations using this in a way that we otherwise couldn't? So kind of looking at it through a positive framework, but more directly to your question, this is a game changer.
Yeah, when I think it makes a lot of sense, and even the spirit in which you're talking about it, I think is how we're hoping to help other believers approach this. I said this in the episode that Garrett and I did, but we're not going to come to the end of this conversation and have 5 neatly packaged sort of like, here's what you do to get this right.
Right, sure.
We're having the conversation while we're still figuring it out, but trying to do it thoughtfully. And you talked about the whole idea of that there are as far as I'm looking, there are the people who have a lot of trepidation, sort of, but are maybe resistant without thinking a lot about it, but just instinctively resistant. And then you have the people who are kind of the instinctive adopters. Like, I haven't really thought about it, but I'm just adopting. To your point, I remember when I was in college, there were certain papers that we were not allowed to cite the internet as sources. And I think a lot of the reason behind that was we don't know how well researched this stuff is. Now, the idea of somebody doing research and being told not to use the internet, I mean, it feels silly. in
Right.
some ways. I'm curious for you as you've engaged, and I know a good chunk of what you do is more for a little bit of older students, but
Mhm.
as you're engaging with people, are you experiencing something with younger people where the idea of not using AI just sort of feels silly to them? Maybe in the same way that to us, we'd say, well, I'm going to be careful, but the idea of not using the internet in my research just seems like, why would you do that to yourself?
I'm not sure if we're quite to that point. I mean, I'm speculating a little bit. We know a lot of the professors. We were teaching summer classes, and we noticed just as of this last summer a massive shift in the obvious use of Chat GPT and these type of tools on papers. And I have a class where they do a final research project, and I think before I'd seen maybe one or two instances, and it jumped to probably over half,
Okay.
where I could clearly see, okay, they're using a statistical technique that we never learned, or they're using notation that's different than what we showed. The most egregious was an instance where you actually saw in the body of the text something along the lines of, yes, I presented this in a way that you can directly copy into your paper. So it was actually Chat GPT's, or one of those bots, right, is they didn't even bother.
They weren't careful enough to edit that part out.
So I think it's so convenient. I think it's such an easy or perceptively easy shortcut. And I think for a student who is under pressure, that maybe they're working, they've got a lot of stuff that's due at the last minute, and someone who wouldn't ordinarily compromise their integrity in that way, say, oh man, I could push a few buttons and I could have this done in seconds. And the temptation, I suspect, is so strong. But when you're in the mode of how do I do this as quickly as possible and without regard to ethics, you're probably not thinking very critically or very carefully. Because if you were thinking critically and carefully, you would just do the assignment. So you're taking these shortcuts, and so you end up with really poor quality work. And there's a lot of confusion around what's proper. You know, what was it okay to do that? So at CBU, as of this year, every class is required to have an AI policy in the syllabus. And this is some had this before, but you can't even necessarily say, well, you violated the honor code. So where does it say you can't use AI to write your paper? It doesn't. I mean, you kind of say, well, okay, this doesn't quite meet this, and that could be plagiarism. But what was my idea to use that as my prompt?
Right.
And so now you'd be very, very explicit. But I don't know that we're at the point that it would seem silly not to, but I think it is becoming more and more of a reflex.
Yeah, more and more mainstream. Where
Definitely mainstream.
Yeah, and partly at least for me, and my interactions have been more limited. But just with people who are younger, it seems silly. Even for me. So I'm 47, so I'm not. I remember when the internet became a thing.
Sure.
But my entire adult life, it has been a thing. It's been. So I'm kind of like I'm not old enough that I'm like leery of the internet in the same way that somebody a little bit older than me might be. But with the Chat GPT and with the AI stuff, I am old enough that I do have kind of the instinct of like, I wish that this didn't exist. I don't want, that sort of thing. Whereas
it's scary.
It is. It feels harder to control in so many ways. And that might be the scary part for some of us.
It's changing. There's so many companies chasing this down and trying to advance on different fronts. And I think it's normal to feel afraid. I would say to anyone watching or listening to this, if you find yourself just scared at some level, I wouldn't be ashamed of that. I wouldn't feel like there's something wrong with you or you're an old fogey or something silly like that. Because I think when you kind of get your head around something and you have the parameters around it, it becomes less and less scary. So when I first encountered large language models, ChatGPT in particular, my mind was blown. Like, this can write a story by itself. This can answer these kind of questions. This can interact with me like a human being, where you wouldn't know the difference in many cases if you're talking to a person online or this computer program. And I learned more about it. Okay, this is how the model works. And it's, when you're on your phone, when you start to type something or an email now, it suggests the next word.
Right.
It's that on steroids, except instead of just a small, database of possible, suggestions, it's like all the knowledge of the world. But it's just autofilling. And there's limitations on, one of the biggest limitations I've learned is power consumption. Right now, ChatGPT uses about as much power as Los Angeles globally. If they were to try to, I was reading this recently, if they were to try to push the the accuracy a little bit, right? It still makes mistakes. This is a big issue.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
is
Well,
the fact that it makes mistakes. And so people say, oh, well, it's going to get better at that. We don't have to worry too much about, getting in the habit of not trusting it, because soon it'll be fine. But pushing it to about 5% higher level of accuracy would increase the power consumption from LA to the entire state of California, Texas, and Florida put together. So there's this exponential increase in power demand. So you get your head around this, and I like, okay, well, that's not so scary, right? It's autocorrect on steroids, and it can only go so far. It probably can't take over the world because there's limitations to that. But then there's this technology, now there's this workaround here, now this is happening. And then once again, well, now my head's not around it, and there's all these unknowns and all this uncertainty. And now I feel, at some level scared again. And I think that's natural.
yeah. Well, and this maybe can lead into this part of the conversation. As we're looking at this, and again, the posture with how we're trying to look at this is to say we're looking for good, and we're looking for danger, just like with any tool. If we were talking about alcohol, we would want to say, hey, we're looking for scripturally, we would see a lot of good for celebration and joy and gift of God. We'd also see a lot of danger with over drinking and dependent and all those sorts of things. So if we're looking at AI in a similar way, for any of us that might feel like we're a little more on the end of reluctance, concern, what are some things that, in your observation, AI is good at?
Well, simple tasks. It can automate simple things very, very well. My background is not computer programming, but I made to understand that AI has gotten much, much better at that. So if you wanted to write a piece of software, create an app, things could happen very quickly that, for example, I wouldn't have the expertise to do manually, but it could do it for me if I could tell it what to do. And so it's great for brainstorming. So if you're, writing in education context, I want to do I have to write a psychology paper on a topic of my choosing. I'm interested in teaching. Give me several ideas of, research topics in the field of teaching that related to, recent advances in psychology, and it can boop, boop, boop. Yeah, it will be very, it strokes your ego. It's very, oh, that sounds like a wonderful project. It's great that you want to serve humanity in this way. Let me suggest, it's very, very flattering, very encouraging. And then it could give you, I want 10, this long list, and you might skim through that. No, hey, that's a really good idea. Actually, I'm quite interested in that. Tell me more about idea number 4, and it fleshes that out some more, and then maybe it begins your journey. I think it's a very appropriate and very productive way to, if you ever stare at a blank screen, you have a creative project. I don't know how it is writing a sermon, but if there's some point where you look at the screen and it's just blank, it can be intimidating.
Oh, yeah.
But here you never have to look at a blank screen. You can say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Give me something. And then ideally it gets your juices flowing, and you bring your own critical thinking and your own personality and agenda and objectives into it. And so I do that a lot. I see other people doing that a lot. I think the big issue is when people turn off their brains and they say, I just want an answer now. I want a product now, and I'm not willing to really put the work or thought into it. And so it's the equivalent, I think, of, hopping on Google and typing something in and just clicking on the first result and just running with it without really thinking about it, which, by the way, is what AI does. The way it's constructed is it's trained on huge amounts of data. I think ChatGPT-5, which is what we have now, was trained about a year ago. And so it knows all of that. But if you ask it a question that's not in its database, something that's more obscure, something more recent, it's going to hop online and basically Google it, and it doesn't critically evaluate the source. So I had an example, it's just something not very serious, but I Google, so my son plays club sports, and I asked ChatGPT, hey, is this particular club, is this a good one? And it comes back and says, well, this is one of the fastest growing clubs in this sport in the Valley, and so if it's growing, it probably means it's good. So where did you get that information from? Well, from their website. Isn't that a biased source? Well, actually, you bring up a very good point. That's also, if you push back, it will, oh, well, you brilliant user. Yes, you bring up a very good point. Yes, that is a biased source, and we probably can't really trust it. Like, well, do you have any other sources? No. but it very confidently gave me an answer. So it doesn't think critically. And if you're not thinking critically, no one's thinking critically. So you're just generating something that may be wrong. It may be limited at the very least. Sometimes it's great, but it can certainly miss things. And in some cases, that's fine. In some cases, that's very dangerous.
Yeah, and I think that's been that kind of hovers around the biggest instinctive concern I've had is the whole sort of outsourcing our critical thinking. But it was interesting because again, like I've outed myself in the last one. I have not used ChatGPT at all. Like I'm not saying that that's the right thing. I just haven't. But my sons have. And so my middle son, who's in high school, last year, he used ChatGPT to help him understand a math concept.
Yes.
And it was really interesting because what he wasn't doing was typing in, here's the math problem, what is the answer? There was a certain concept and he found it incredibly helpful. And then he was able to bring that back to his math homework and he understood. And to me, even as a more reluctant person on AI, I saw like, oh, that seems like a proper use of that.
The back and forth is very powerful.
Yeah.
And that's something you get from AI like ChatGPT that you don't get from a Google search. Or even, YouTube is a tremendous source of information. But if you have a question, you're watching a YouTube video or you're reading a website and you say, well, wait, it says this here, but I read this over here and they seem like incompatible ideas and I don't understand. And you could try to formulate that and it may not register anywhere. You may not get that answer. With ChatGPT, you could say, well, I read this here and I read that there. Help me reconcile this. And it will say, oh, well, that's a fantastic question that you ask. I can certainly see the confusion. Let's explore that together. And then typically, correctly, it will walk through and tell you, explain that juxtaposition. So here's why they're both true, or here's the nuance of that you're not familiar with. And if you want to be very sure, you could then drill down on that. Well, I'm going to leave ChatGPT. I'm going to search that idea myself and see if that's indeed correct. But usually it is.
Yeah.
So that's another tremendous opportunity for students to have a conversation that you would have with a professor, with a teacher, but now they don't need to be there. Instead of emailing your professor, hey, explain this, you can probably, because I would get an email from a student, usually, well, just pop that into Google and there you go. Or someone works in IT, my friend works in IT, and that's kind of the joke is you get it and you just basically copy and paste the question from their email into Google and then copy and paste the answer back. But here it's just another layer of sophistication. But what a great resource.
Yeah. Now when we had our conversation a few weeks ago, I brought up my whole concern about critical thinking.
Right.
And you had an interesting comment back where you said, okay, before people were using this, how many people were thinking that critically?
Right.
And the point you were bringing up that I thought was a really valid point was not just, you weren't just ragging on people. It was, this is not we had none of this and now we're jumping to the end. We have been outsourcing our critical thinking to different degrees for a while with the internet and with other tools. And that to me was even helpful in looking at this overall and saying, we're not going 0 to 60 with this, that this has been gradual. And so that's why even I make fun of myself a little bit by being like, I haven't used ChatGPT, but I've used other tools that are overlapping with this. So it's not like I'm not using anything that's in this family with the whole thing. But I think a lot of my concern when we talk about the critical thinking idea is just, are we going to lose our ability to do this? Are we going to lose our ability to pause and sort of sit with a problem for a minute? Like I remember, this is true still sometimes with my kids, but especially when they were younger, sometimes we would ask them a question and it would be like, why did you do this? Or why do you think this person responded this way? And it was something that was not just, what color is that wall? It was something that took a little bit of brain power. And they would very quickly say, I don't know. Like, why did you do that? I don't know. Why do you think that person got mad at you? I don't know. And we would force them to say like, okay, it may be that at the end of the day, that is your answer, but I want you to pause. I want you to think about it. Like we put in the timer, maybe like, I want you to think about it for a minute and see if you can come up with a theory. And they could. When they would pause to think about it, they would say, well, maybe it's because of this other thing. They would start to put the pieces together, but they were just so quick to want to say, I don't know, that they weren't engaging that part of their brain. So I think that for me is part of the concern with this, to say, are there things that we could figure out. Like even, I'm praising it. And I think when my son used it to help him with the math, it did seem to me to be a proper use. But even with something like that, I might look at it and say, with things like that, if we sat and thought and engaged, would we be able to say, okay, wait a second, I think I am putting this together. And is our ability to use a shortcut putting us in a position where we're suddenly not only not going to be able to think critically about that area, but just will lose this skill? So I'm curious, just, we talked about this, but curious about your thoughts about that. And then are you seeing any trends and observations in the circles that you're in that would give any credence to that concern?
Losing skills is a big one, writing in particular, because most people, I think, are poor writers. If you talk to college, certainly introductory college English professors. And so students are coming in, they're trying to teach them basic writing skills, really any discipline, even going into graduate school to a degree. Students really struggle with this. And so to say you need to sit down and write something is intimidating and scary. And to have a tool that can just create it instantly. I think it's really easy to say, I'm just going to sort of circumvent ever having developed that skill or that discipline. I got to using it for a lot of things that don't require a lot of creativity. So, if I'm going to send an email and I want, for whatever I want to send an email, giving information about here's this event and here's what you need to bring and, things like that. Having ChatGPT cranking out the site, you just skim through, yes, it's fine. But if I want to share my heart or really express something meaningful, I've had moments, I think there was a moment, actually it kind of scared me. I had a moment where I sat down and I was, wait, how do you write? And I was like, okay, yes, okay, what am I trying to say? And what are the main ideas? And let me organize this a little bit. Spelling, so ChatGPT can, if you write it poorly, so, the letter's in the wrong place and the words are spelled wrong and it's sloppy, it can understand it perfectly. It has no problem. So I can type much, much faster. I probably increase my typing speed by 30% because I don't care about accuracy. It's no problem. And so then I'll go to type, an email to, a colleague or something. And then I realize I start to write and it's not good. So I have to go, slow down, backspace. Nope. That letter should be at the start of this word, not the end of that word. So losing skills, especially creative skills, I think is a legitimate concern. I think the critical thinking, as you brought up, even in media, think about the way we consume media now is we get to choose someone's listening to this podcast and they're listening to it probably because at some level they agree with your worldview and that resonates with them. You're talking about, how do we live out, conservative Christian values, in the world. And so someone who thinks very differently won't even listen to the podcast. It wouldn't be of interest to them. And now we have algorithms on YouTube that knows what you like. And so it's going to give you thumbnails and it's going to give you channels and topics that it knows resonate with you. And if you're offended by something, then you're not going to watch it and they're not going to make ad revenue. So all this is being tailored to us. I think it's kind of this broader idea of, and that's actually a problem with ChatGPT. Version 4.0 before the current version, it got so sycophantic because you would go in and you would rate every so often you rate the response. It gives you 2 responses. You say, which one do you prefer? And then it uses those data to refine the model. So people liked very flattering responses. And so when it says, wow, what a brilliant question you've come up with. I can, or you've got, this is, like, hey, can you help me proofread this paper? This is one of the best written papers I have ever seen. Like, well, I pushed back one time. I'm like, you have read the internet. And you found that this is one of the best papers out of the whole out of all the knowledge ever created in the history of the world. My paper is one of the best. So it's very flat. Yeah, well, why? Thank you. And there was a little human part of me that was flattered, and then the critical part of me thinks that's so silly. This is clearly not the best of anything. It's probably it's quality work, but this is just something that's been reinforced over time. So it's this broader idea of us wanting to be flattered and wanting to, gravitating towards content in any shape or form that makes us feel good.
Yeah. And this
doesn't challenge our beliefs. It's not hard.
And that's a little bit related to the next one. You mentioned it a little bit ago, but just on the whole accuracy question. Now, this is another one that it's not like this is a unique AI problem. This is, I feel like with the internet in general, we've been dealing with, I mean, lies preceded the internet and disinformation
Yes.
preceded the internet. But it's been more and more this lately where I think there is this sense of we're not always sure what's real. There's the deep fakes, there's the, different generated things. There's all sorts of things out there that I think for some of us, we've developed. Like there was actually, it's funny because it turned out this thing was real, but there was this story recently in baseball where there was this Phillies game and there was this dad that got this home run ball and gave it to his son, but then this woman who it bounced away from her and she thought she should have had it, came over and confronted him, and he ended up giving her the ball. And I kept seeing this story and I was just I was convinced it was fake. I was like, this never happened. It's because it too perfectly fit sort of the sort of the Karen idea and all of this stuff.
Wasn't it? And then someone gave him an RV and
all of this stuff. But I was like, okay, this actually did happen. I thought, but part of it was that I had my radars up and I'm so I'm not going to be fooled. There's things out there. As we're interacting specifically with AI, what are some things that you've found that have been helpful in just checking the accuracy? Because it can be easy to say, this tool has information, has access to everything. So why would I even question whether what I'm getting is accurate info?
Sure. So accuracy is a big deal. Some differences between what we've had in the past, right? There's always been lies. There's always been poor sources. So with the internet, before AI, you teach junior high kids how to do research online. I mean, even probably younger, that you have a 10, 11, 12-year-old, and you start to teach them about the credibility of different sources. And they keep it simple. Hey, if it has a GOV suffix on the website, it's probably more reliable than someone's blog post. And so, what's the source? Is it an ORG? And again, that's overly simplistic, but just get them thinking about the idea of credibility. And if you could look at a source and say, okay, this is just someone's random blog post, or I saw it on Facebook. It's so often, I think I let people get their news from Facebook and YouTube now. And so I'll even, in conversation, I'll even say, I read on Facebook, I didn't look it up myself, so I'm not sure if it's true. This is a long disclaimer. But at some level, hopefully we get a sense for, I don't know if the problem I mentioned ChatGPT a lot. That's the platform I'm most familiar with. I think it's very well known. So I can't speak exactly to how this might work with other tools, but it doesn't tell you how certain it is of something. It's making a guess, and it doesn't, it just is confident. It's confident in every answer, regardless of the probability of a correct answer. So, like I said before about the autocorrect thing, it's just probability. So it's looking out there and saying, this is probably the answer that you would expect to your question, and it just says it this is definitively the case. And if it's something that you wanted to look up online, it will just find the first thing and pull it in. And we'll be sure. And if you challenge it, then it will be this 180. Well, actually, isn't this the case? Oh, yes, that's the case. Well, you seem, because you can challenge. Are you sure? I'm sure. I'm very. Are you really sure? I'm really sure. Actually, it's that. Oh, yes, it is. Or are you sure of that now? Absolutely. So, well, wait a minute. How can it? And now that you can actually challenge it a little bit, or not challenge, but there's something called verify mode. And you can say, okay, give me an answer in verify mode. And that means it has to actually go find a source. It doesn't just pull something out of thin air, which is called hallucination, is the term that's used. And as I understand it, again, not being an expert, hallucination, just pull something out of thin air. It's very sure if it's just nonsense, where it has to go find it. You can actually ask for a probability of certainty. Say, how sure are you that this is the correct answer? And it can come up with, well, I'm 30% sure, I'm 70% sure. You can say, think very hard about this before you answer, but it slows down. And it could take, it can be shocking how fast you can get a response. You put in, read this paper and give me thoughtful reflections, and it's a 10-page paper, and you hit enter, and you swear by the time your finger's off the key, it's on the screen, the response. How? So that's the baseline now. And then now it might wait for a minute and a half. And a minute and a half on chat, it feels like an eternity. You're just sitting there. I'm gonna go to a different app and do something like I'll check my email. I might
Watch
even
a
forget,
YouTube video.
watch a YouTube short. I've even forgotten I was having this conversation, and it'll come back, a minute and a half later, and it may give you a better response. But it knows that people don't like that. They want a fast answer, and that's more important than a solid answer to most users. But there are ways to kind of press in. But a lot of times, it'll just give, and things that you would think it would know. I haven't done this with the newest version, but APA formatting, right? So you write a paper, whether you're a student, whether you're a scholar, and you want your references in a particular format. So in psychology, we use APA format. And I was writing a paper for publication, and it's kind of a tedious thing. It's, hey, would you just format my references in APA format for me? There we go. Save some time. It's a simple task, and it was just wrong. And I didn't look very closely, and so I send this off to peer review, and I'm getting feedback from peer-reviewed scholars that are like, you need to check your references. I mean, this, and I do finally like, oh, this is so embarrassing. And I'm thinking, this is common knowledge. I mean, you could Google this and find 100 websites across universities and APA website. And it's not ambiguous. It's not nuanced. It's, the title of an article is in italics or the journal name. And it's just always been that way and always will be that way. And everyone knows it. And yet it's wrong. So definitely a big concern. And if you want expediency, you're going to miss that stuff. And will it get better? Probably some, but as I mentioned before, it's hard to make it a little better.
Yeah. Well, kind of bringing this full circle, and we can both maybe comment on this. A lot of the way that I'm framing this, and this, even this, our second podcast conversation about this will not be the last one we do, but just as we're framing it again, looking at people who are instinctively resistant, trying to have a framework where there might be some affirmation of like, yep, there are real legitimate concerns, but here's a broader view of it. The people who are instant adopters who are just like, this is here, why wouldn't we use it? It's silly, to be reluctant about this. What would you like to share in order, and maybe it could be something that touches on both groups, just in terms of as believers in Jesus who value truth, who value using the gifts and the faculties that God has given us, who value community, like all of these different things. What are some words that you would share about what it looks like to, in a healthy way, engage with this tool that is very new to us?
I would say I would start with just dipping your toe in the water. Things that are unknown if you're completely ignorant of it, it's much, much scarier. You'll hear things and things that are dramatic. Is AI going to take over the world, right? And it's funny. There was some research on people using polite language to ChatGPT, saying please and thank you to ChatGPT. I mean, this is just a computer program. It has no, but there are people, we'll say that, please, can you tell me, thank you for this. I appreciate it. It was very helpful. And someone calculated the amount of power that's generated, that's expended by people saying please and thank you. And when people drill down, well, why do you say that? It's like, well, because when AI takes over the world, I wanted to remember me that I was kind to it. Wow. And it sounds ridiculous, but at some level, it's, this is probably going to be a robot overlord someday. And I want the Terminators to know that I was polite. I always said thank you to the Terminator, right? So this kind of thinking and ideas are out there, and so if you know nothing about it, it's even scarier. So go on ChatGPT, play with it, ask some questions, and you can ask it about itself. Like, how did you come up with that answer? I'm curious. I'm really impressed with what you said. Where did you get that from? Or can you explain how this happened? Or have it make a picture for you. You can upload a picture of your family and make it into a cartoon, or just have a little bit of fun with it. There's some other platforms, so at least you kind of know something about it. It doesn't feel so scary. Find something positive to do with it. That might be maybe something that's edifying. I've used it in Bible studies extensively. I read somewhere that some people question I think it was the authorship of 2 Peter. Did Peter really write this? Because 1 Peter has a different tone, and so tell me what scholars say about that. I said, well, here's kind of some this and this, and so I said, oh well. in Acts, it records sermons of Peter. Which book fits better that style? And it says, well, actually, Second Peter kind of feels more like that because, it's a little looser and maybe doesn't feel as transcribed by a scholar. And so I have this whole conversation about the authorship of Second Peter, and I learned a lot from it. It was very valuable. So, maybe find some space to bring it in, maybe something that's edifying, something that's even spiritually edifying to you, so that it can be your friend, and it's not so scary, not so unknown.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing that I'll put in just in kind of processing this, because I'm trying to take the road of saying I do think that there are proper uses for this. Especially when it comes to things like you were talking, compiling information. I think the compiling of information is helpful. We do need to double check, but still, it's like that's a real blessing. We have access to more information, more articles. Finding things that would have cost us a lot of money in the past, but now we have access to them. I do think a lot of times what I keep coming back to, or one of the concerns I keep coming back to, is the whole idea of just God has placed us in bodies. He's placed us in bodies. We're created in his image. We are made for meaningful relationship with God, but also meaningful community relationships with others. Like God himself is triune. Like we are, God himself is a community of persons, as some have put it, which is, not precise, but is describing the nature of God as a Trinity. And so for us, part of being created in his image is we're in relationships with others. And so part of the thought that I think would be wise for us to have a lot as we're engaging in this is the thought of, what is it that I'm replacing here? Because even in research, I'm like, okay, by having this compile list, am I replacing that I have to get 12 to 15 different books off my shelf, look up the page, okay, I may be okay with replacing that. Or I might count the cost and say, I think that's worth replacing me doing that action by just having instant access to it. Am I wanting to replace meaningful interaction with this? And, from there, I'm like, well, no, I don't want to do that. And the fact that there's even a nature with AI where it sort of is like you said, a little bit flattering, conversational, that's where I'd say, man, we all crave this. And if we find I'm going here, and one of the reasons why I'm going here is because I have sort of this, I'm able to have an interaction that feels good, that feels like I'm heard, that feels like I'm valued.
That's a very real thing. And there's a good number of people who can't wait to get home from work to tell AI about their day. Wow. They're lonely. And this is, I think, part of a broader trend of technology being isolating. We talk sometimes about the youth mental health crisis. They did some child development research and so forth. And I think smartphones has been a big contributor to that because of the isolation that goes along with this type of technology. And so I think it can both continue to take us down that path of isolation, while in a very superficial, in a very artificial way, trying to meet that need. It's interesting. Also, a big fear, kind of is related to this, is will I lose my job? Right. I was just listening to a podcast this morning that entry-level software engineers are having trouble finding work because AI can replicate those tasks. Senior software engineers jobs feel more secure because they have a level of experience and intuition and an insight that it's at least not yet replicatable. Sam Altman from OpenAI, who created ChatGPT, we were talking about education. He had an interview, not me and him, but he had an interview with someone else. And they said, well, AI teachers, right? AI can replace teachers. And he, which I thought to his credit, was arguing back, I don't know. And the other guy, well, what do you mean? I mean, it's so much smarter. They can pivot, use all the latest strategies, bring in all this insight, differentiate. What does a human being even have to offer? And Sam Altman says, well, when I was in school, it was the relationship with my teachers, the fact that somebody believed in me, that spoke into my life, who knew me, who encouraged me. That's what inspired me to become who I am, not just their knowledge. And that's what I think about as I structure my classes is how do I create an experience that can't just be outsourced to, I still teach online. Online education, it's asynchronous, there's videos. When I'm in a room in front of human beings, that was my first thought is what can I do with them here in person that they could not do over the internet? Right? Because that was different. Well, is the internet going to replace education?
Yeah.
Right?
Which is even that question you were just asking was a question we were asking a lot as we were coming out of the COVID pandemic of saying, what is it we can do when we're gathered that we weren't able to do? And how do we maximize and really celebrate those things that we can only do this because we're in the same room at the same time?
There's a sociology to that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that's not my complete background, but there's entire theories built out that having this, like we need a sense of belonging and community, and you have to physically be in the same place at the same time with other people doing the same thing. And I just think as a pastor, right? You write a sermon and you stand up on Sunday in front of us and preach this sermon. And if we think about like, well, why do we need you to do that? I mean, you're a fantastic teacher, but there's others who are quite good. Why don't you stay home and we'll just play a live feed from somewhere else? Or, we could there could be some repository of really good sermons and there's 500 great sermons. And why doesn't the church just play them throughout each week? We'll just play a 45-minute sermon. The teachings, let's just say it is better than yours. I mean, just hypothetically speaking.
Anything's possible.
Anything's possible. Why don't we do that, right? Logically, right? Well, if it's just about good teaching, why not? And what is it about having you stand there, who we have some, we're friends, but there's some sense of relationship with, where, like you said, even broader, why not watch it at home? But even if we're in the same building with other people, I'm worshiping together, why does it matter that you're there? Or why does someone pay or travel to go see a speaker? I want to go see this person, this famous person speak live. Why not watch a video of them speaking or listen to someone else share the same information better, right? Sometimes famous people are bad speakers. I've seen plenty, but it's still so cool. I got to meet Ray Bradbury and see him speak before he died. And it was so cool. He was not a good speaker. So there's just something there in our human experience that having someone there live, having an actual teacher, the fact that they do know us, that there's relationship, because again, that was the thing as well. Is online education going to wipe out face-to-face education? Right? It's cheaper, it's more efficient. You can hire, sometimes online schools will hire professors from other states because it's cheaper there. So I can pay them less and they can teach just as well, and who cares? Right. So, but is there some value? And there seems to be someone paying more to send their child to a university to just to sit down, interact with human beings. Now, ironically, one question that our online people are wrestling with is AI going to wipe out online education? Because so many things you can, I did online exams forever. And I would say, I don't mind if you use the internet or use your textbook and things like that, because you still have to engage with the material. Now you can just take a screenshot of the test and paste it into ChatGPT and just say, give me the answers, B, B, A, D, B, B, and you'll probably get an A or B on the test. Depending on, some might make mistakes, but you'll get a passing grade almost certainly. Being able to bust out papers so quickly, where it can be, if they remember to delete the part where it says, yes, you can paste this into your, the hyperlinks. And that way, right with the internet first, it was like they copy and paste Wikipedia and forgot to delete the hyperlinks. This is the equivalent of that. But now is this going to wipe out online education? Can we do this in a way that actually maintains some level of integrity? These are big questions that people are asking.
Yeah, and I think they're worthwhile, and that's part of even the nature of these conversations we're having, where we're saying we want to talk about this as we're still figuring it out. And there are a lot of things like this for us as believers, where something comes into the world, we've got to decide how to interact with it. We've got to decide how to live in this new reality. And as you were talking about earlier, how do we make use of any tools that are out there for the good of the gospel, for the good of living a passionate life, pursuing Jesus? And how are we wary of the concerns? And how are we making sure we're not replacing something good that God has given us with something that's fast or something that's easy? I don't think I think we will always have some way that we're delving into that. And it's going to be good for, hopefully, just through this conversation, we're putting out some things in terms of perspective to be aware of what's going on. And also just in how we're engaging with this, not from a purely numbers statistical mindset, but a thoughtful mindset about how we as believers in Jesus do this. So I just want to say thanks for coming on. I was really looking forward to this. It was one of my first things after we had that Chipotle conversation to say, we gotta go, not live, but we got to go on the podcast. We got to take this show on the road and have this conversation. So I really appreciate you doing this, and even for the research and areas that you've brought in to help us learn a little bit more about this.
No, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. I'm hungry for Chipotle.
Yeah, well, we'll get that on the calendar soon.
There we go.
But thanks so much for doing this, and thanks so much to all of you who took the time to listen or to watch this. Once again, hopefully this was fruitful. If you have questions or feedback, or if even as we're delving into this and you're wanting to hear an AI conversation that tackles some other area that we haven't yet, I just invite you to leave a comment here. All the Christian Contrast videos can be found on our YouTube channel for Life Bible Fellowship Church, and then also just right on our website for lbf.church. And so I say that also because if you really enjoyed this, or if you feel like this was helpful or fruitful, you can go back. We have years worth of past episodes that are meant to do this same sort of thing, help us to think through issues biblically and have Jesus at the center of our lives. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Until then, thanks so much for taking the time to listen.